What's up, everybody? It's Jesse, and I'm back one last time in 2020 for the last installment of this calendar year. Lesson number 11, we're going to talk about practical solutions to stressful thinking. And I've spent the last couple of videos convincing you guys that, sometimes when things are going rough, we kind of lie to ourselves. We have those cognitive distortions, that stinking thinking. And honestly, in my opinion, I've spent way too much time talking about the problem and not nearly enough time talking about the solution. Actually, a couple weeks ago, I had a student at Collinsville High School who was like, yeah, I know I'm doing this stuff, but Jesse, what do I do about it? And I told him that I would get to that. And so here we are. We're going to do something today called a cognitive reframe. And basically, in a cognitive reframe, what we do is we take that cognitive distortion, that stinking thinking, and we break it down and figure out ways to get around it, above it, go through it, do whatever we've got to do to get around that difficult thinking, that difficult thought that is causing your stress. So what is a cognitive reframe? Basically, what we're talking about here is anytime you identify yourself as under stress, having some difficult thinking, and you recognize that, hey, you know what, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing this to myself. And it's just like if you were looking at a picture and, the picture maybe isn't exactly what you want it to be, but you think, you know what, maybe this picture would look a whole lot better if I took that frame off of it and put a better frame around it, or if I looked at that picture in a different way. It's like anytime you've ever been, hanging artwork or a piece and you think, okay, I like this piece, but I'm not really sure if I like how it looks or how it fits. And so you figure out another way to make it fit a little bit better, to make it look a little bit better, or just honestly make it feel a little. There are 4 basic steps to this cognitive reframe, and I'm going to take each one and kind of break them down individually, but just as a quick overview, in step number 1, we identify the negative thought, right? What's causing the stress. Number 2, we acknowledge that thought is probably not true. Step number 3, we reframe or restate that thought to ourselves in a more positive or a realistic way. And in the last one, we just repeat that reframe to ourselves over and over until the difficult thought goes away. And so with these 4 basic steps, we're going to take your difficult thinking, we're going to take your stinking thinking, and we're going to make it smell just a little bit better. Step number 1, identify the negative thought. And so just like in the picture, those dark clouds are brewing, you can feel that, a storm is coming. You've dealt with the trigger before, you've got some cues, you feel your frustration mounting or that anxiety building up. There's tension in your chest, you're tense, and you have to really, at this point, check in with your thoughts, check in with your thinking. What is running through your head at that moment when you're triggered? Chances are, somewhere in there, there's a... Okay, so the best way for us to do this is to come up with a real concrete example, right? Something that is probably going to happen to most of us if it hasn't happened to you already. And let's say for a minute that you are running late for work, right? So that's something that is going to happen to everybody at some point. Sometimes you might catch a flat tire or your alarm clock doesn't go off, and so you wake up, you realize, oh my God, I'm going to be late for work. And so you're already triggered, right? So you're already under a little bit of stress. But our brain will go there and it will start thinking things like, oh my God, I can't be late again. What if I get fired? And so that's that negative thought. And once we identify the negative thought, we can start to realize that, okay, I'm probably having a cognitive distortion. This thing that I think is happening, it hasn't happened yet, right? So we can acknowledge that, we're already stressed, we're already dealing with a situation, but our thinking has already started to kind of to take us in a direction that we don't really need to go. And sometimes when people have these thoughts, they go to desperate behaviors. They don't think clearly. When we're stressed, we have a tendency to let that stress really get to us, and so we have to acknowledge that negative thought. And so in this case, or in the example that I'm going to use, the negative thought, the difficult thinking, the cognitive distortion is, I'm going to get fired. At this point, we have acknowledged that we're under stress and that we're dealing with some negative feelings. And that leads us to step 2. We need to acknowledge that this thought is probably not true. Is it possible that you might get in trouble or you might have to deal with some consequences for being late? Sure. But do you know for a fact whether or not you're going to get fired? Until it happens, the answer is probably no. And so we have to acknowledge that this difficult thinking, this negativity, it's probably a lie. It's probably a cognitive distortion. It's probably not. For most of us, this is the most difficult step in the process. We have a tendency as human beings to trust our own thinking, to trust our own feelings, and it is very, very difficult to acknowledge that you might lie to yourself. Unfortunately, it is the case, and we have to do this, right? So we have to second guess ourselves a little bit in this to be able to acknowledge the fact that, we can't see the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And it is very comforting to think that you can. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And in the example that I used, we talked about, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. And the truth of the matter is you don't know until you show up to the job and you do that. And what happens with this is when people don't acknowledge that, then they start to worry and they think that they've got to do something that may not be in their best interest to keep themselves from being fired, when in fact, you don't know. And so, an example I used earlier is sometimes when people are running late, they'll call off, they call their boss, oh, I'm sick, I can't come in today, hoping that somehow a lie will cover up for the fact that they're late. And really, in the end, you are so much better off just to acknowledge that you don't know what's going to happen. And so you might as well show up. Is it a good idea to call in if you're going to be late? Yes. But to call off work doesn't really make a lot of sense. But when we're stressed, again, our thoughts get scrambled, we get a little frazzled, and we have to acknowledge that, probably it's just a lie and everything's going to be okay. At this point, we find ourselves at step number 3. And in step 3, what we do is we reframe or restate that negative thought to ourselves in a more positive way. And just like in the picture, we have to take a minute, take a deep breath, peel back those dark clouds, and recognize that it is entirely possible, if not entirely likely, that this is stress that we're doing to ourselves. And for some of us, it is difficult to do this. And if you have the opportunity to check in with a friend or talk to somebody about it, it kind of helps you to reframe or restate these ideas to yourself, or just sometimes even for people just to say it out loud will help them to put a different frame around that difficult thought. So in our example, we have to ask ourselves, what would a reframe look like? And so you've caught yourself in your difficult thought, you've recognized that it's probably not true, and you have to look at what the truth really is. And the truth of the matter is, you have to say to yourself, I don't know what's going to happen, so I better get ready, I better go in, I better hustle up. But as you do this, there are all kinds of different ways that you can reframe this statement. One simple, easy solution to almost all of the difficult thinking and anxiety sorts of thoughts that we have is, it's going to be okay. Maybe I'm late, but it's probably going to be okay. It'll probably be all right. And if we just recognize that, when things are done, when you get stuck at that red light, when you run into some sort of problem, this, that, or the other, or maybe you can't catch a ride, you just have to, restate that thought. maybe I'm not going to get fired. Sometimes it can be as simple as that. Maybe, maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe no one will even notice. If you're starting a shift and it's not real busy, there are times where nobody notices. And the truth of the matter is we don't know. You don't know. But a simple, easy reframe for this is it's going to be okay. I'll get there as soon as I can, and everything's going to be all right. I'm going to be all right. Step number 4. Repeat the reframe to yourself until the difficult thought goes away. And this is very difficult. Our minds will trick us into being upset. And unfortunately, when we're stressed and when stressful events happen, those difficult thoughts, they'll keep coming back. They'll keep popping up. And so we repeat the phrase as many times to ourselves as we have to, and we just do what we've got to do. It takes a massive amount of conscious effort to talk yourself out of that stressful thought. But I can tell you that every single time it's going to be worth it. Unfortunately, as human beings, the stress response in our brain is very powerful, and it will keep rearing its ugly head as long as we let it. And so in step 4, what we do is we use the conscious part of our brain, the part that actually has some control, to just keep repeating that reframe over and over to ourselves, right? And so sometimes what we have to do is we just take a deep breath. It's okay. And, on that ride, the car ride, the bus ride, however we're getting to work that day, we may have to, several times, just keep repeating it over and over to ourselves. I'm going to be okay. Probably not going to get fired. It's going to be okay, Jesse. Just calm down. Just calm down. And typically, those difficult thoughts don't usually last more than a minute or two. And so if we can really stick with this, if we can really, have what it takes to beat this difficult thinking, then we can push through that. And it takes a lot of effort. Like I said, unfortunately, the stressful part of our brains is pretty darn powerful. But if you practice this, if you practice these steps, then eventually you get to a place where that difficult thought does go away. And just like, with those dark storm clouds, the wind will keep blowing. And as long as we keep trying, as long as we keep restating these things to ourselves, eventually you will beat that difficult thought, and it will be for the better. The reason why this is so important is that because those difficult thoughts are so powerful, they can really lead to a lot of bad choices. And I'll give you some other examples here in a minute, but you just need to stick with it, right? And so I am here to encourage you guys to really try these reframes, to really give it the effort that it deserves, because that stress is honestly, it's not going to do anything for you, and more likely than not, it's going to lead to some difficult choices. So we really need to stick with it. So in the end, what this all comes down to is just good old-fashioned good thinking. And the fancy word for this is something called optimism. And optimism is any time that you believe that good things are going to happen. And so as we're dealing with stress, as we're dealing with setbacks, it can be pretty hard to have that good thinking that is going to be necessary to get you through. But it's definitely worth it. It's definitely a thing that we should strive for. And so I have to admit, 2020 has not been the greatest, and it might be hard to see the silver lining that is in all these clouds, to have that optimism. But I really do believe that good things are going to happen. You guys are going to get the jobs that you want eventually. You're going to graduate school. Eventually, quarantine will be over. We won't have to wear these masks. And we have to look out for those cognitive distortions, right? So a basic cognitive distortion that a lot of us have had is, this is going to go on forever, and this is going to, it's never going to end, and I'm always going to have to do this. But but that's just really not true. And so if you can believe that good things are going to happen, then they're more likely to come true. And so I just challenge each and every one of you to have some optimism throughout your day, throughout your Christmas break, right? Whenever difficult things happen, just try to believe in your heart that good things are going to happen, and then they will probably come to pass. So that is going to wrap it up for the 2020 version of Social School and these videos. It has been a privilege to get to meet a lot of you, and for those of you that we haven't met yet, I believe that good things will happen. We will get a chance to meet each other sometime in second semester. I want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, a great Christmas break, and Happy New Year. When I come back in 2021, I'm going to give you a whole list of reasons why you should be optimistic and believe that good things were going to happen. And that's all I've got for today. Peace.